Hi there, welcome to the start of a new series of devlogs, following the creation of a multiplayer co-op heist game. At the moment the project doesn't have a real title, so I'm just calling it Heist Heist for the time being. My goal for Heist Heist is for it to be a colourful and energetic third-person game that gives players an open approach to how they want to carry out the heists. I imagine most of the time it's going to end up in a shootout though, so the gunplay and weapons need to feel fun and responsive. I've got some other concepts that I'd like to explore that should separate it from the other heist games on the market, but I'm not ready to start dropping those spoilers quite yet. After some deliberation and running tests in different game engines,
wow! Incredible!
I've decided to stick with the engine I've been using professionally for over a decade. That engine is Unity. I know they've made some very questionable decisions recently, but I've decided to stick with Unity, mostly because of the netcode for GameObject's multiplayer package, which allows you to set up a multiplayer game very easily, but also just because I know the engine so well at this point. I know it's probably not the most effective place to start with a new project, but I decided to model a placeholder character that's in fitting with the style I'm aiming for in Heist Heist. So I booted up Blender and modelled the character using a subdivision surface modifier over a very low poly base model. Once I was happy with this base model, I swapped over to sculpting mode to fix up the hands and some of the facial details. The eyes are modelled in a style I've used on several projects before, where you model the iris and pupil internally and put a transparent curved surface over them to represent the cornea. Once I'm mostly happy with the proportions of the body, I export it to an FBX and take it over to Substance Painter, where I bake the texture maps like the ambient occlusion and curvature. And then I build up the skin texture using those maps as masks over various fill layers. I'm going to put off sculpting the hair and clothes for the moment, as this is just a placeholder model whilst I get the game up and running. For this first iteration, I'm just going to use Mixamo for the rigging and animation. The arm rigging could definitely use some improvement, but on the whole Mixamo does a fantastic job with such little effort. And now we finally get around to the scripting part of the video. I started by just building a basic character controller script. This uses the same fundamentals as the Unity third-person controller asset available on the asset store. But I built my own camera controller script by placing several Sin Machine virtual cameras behind the player model for left and right shoulder views, both close and far to represent the player aiming, plus a camera on the gun for when the player aims down the sight. To implement the jump, I followed along with the excellent videos on velocity vertlet integration by iHeartGameDev, as this is a great approach to make sure the jump feels nice, but also that they are consistent across different frame rates. Whilst implementing the movement and jumping, I also have been setting up a basic animation controller for the placeholder character model. This is a very simple controller and just covers forward movement and jumping. Now that I had a single player character controller working, it was time to get those same scripts working in multiplayer. The basis of configuring the player controllers to work over the network is simply adding network transform components to the player objects, and setting the player prefab to be spawned whenever a new client joins the game. Because my game is a co-op game, I don't need to worry so much about server authority, so I used client authorized network transforms. The script for these is very simple and can be found on the Unity netcode website. I'll link it in the description below. To make sure each player only controls their own character, we just changed the character controller script to inherit from the network behavior class, and check if the local instance is the owner before executing the movement methods. It's been a few months since I've used netcode for GameObjects, and I made some pretty poor decisions about how to divide my input and character controller script, which has led to the gun shooting in the wrong direction now that I've changed it to a multiplayer script. It's a fairly simple fix, and I'll come back and do another pass at these classes in the next episode. I intend to release some of my core script, so if that's something that interests you, let me know in the comments and keep an eye out for future episodes. To implement the shooting, I first used server-side remote procedure calls to instantiate each bullet. But even under perfect network conditions, this method creates irregular delays between the bullets firing, which don't look or sound right at all when you're using fully automatic weapons. So for the moment, I've decided to handle the bullets entirely locally on each player's machine. I've set the trigger down variable to be a network variable. That way all players will get a pretty good representation of other players' shots. They may not be perfect, but in a casual co-op shooter like this, it's not the end of the world if some of the bullets are out of sync. To test out the bullets, I whipped up a quick combination safe in Blender and Substance Painter. And also brought in some Mixamo animations to make some zombie characters. Bullet collisions are handled locally, but once the bullet has collided, the client executes a server remote procedure call to implement the damage across all players. This means we can now shoot zombies and break open the safe by simply shooting it enough. And that is as far as I've got for the moment. If you would like to stay up to date, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'll be aiming to release the next episode in a few weeks, and then build towards a regular schedule from there. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.